The crystal doors of the throne room shattered into 1,000 pieces as Princess Yuna threw them open with her telekinetic powers. And every council member turned to stare at the young Valorian royal who stormed inside with fury burning in her violet eyes. "Father, I will never wed a human," she screamed across the vast chamber, her voice echoing off walls made of pure starlight crystal that had stood for 10,000 years. Emperor Taesung rose slowly from his throne, his ancient face showing no surprise at his daughter's dramatic entrance, for he had expected this reaction from the moment he signed the marriage contract 3 days ago. The Galactic Council representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their various alien forms displaying discomfort in different ways. And the human ambassador at the far end of the table kept his expression carefully neutral despite the insult he had just witnessed. "Yuna, you will control yourself," the emperor said in a voice that carried the weight of 800 years of rule. "This decision was not made lightly, and you will respect the wisdom of your elders." But Yuna was beyond caring about respect or wisdom or anything else, except the burning rage that consumed her heart. And she marched forward until she stood directly before the council table, where the marriage documents lay waiting for her signature. "You want me to bond with one of them?" she demanded, pointing at the human ambassador with disgust. "These creatures live barely a century if they are lucky, and you expect me to waste my 800 years of life watching one of them wither and die like a flower in winter?" The human ambassador, a man named Director Chun with gray hair and calm brown eyes, finally spoke in a quiet voice that somehow filled the entire room. "Princess Yuna, I understand your concerns, but this alliance could bring peace to—" "I did not give you permission to address me," Yuna snapped, and a wave of telekinetic force knocked the documents off the table and sent them scattering across the floor. Emperor Taesung's eyes flashed with anger, but he kept his voice steady as he descended the steps from his throne and approached his daughter with measured steps that spoke of patience worn thin. "The Human Systems Alliance controls 40% of known space," he said, each word carefully chosen. "Their population grows at a rate we cannot match, and their technology advances faster than any species in galactic history. So tell me, daughter, would you prefer war?" Yuna laughed bitterly at this question, tossing her silver hair over her shoulder with contempt clear on her beautiful face. "Let them come," she said. "Our telepathic abilities alone could crush their primitive minds, and our shields could withstand their weapons for centuries while they exhaust themselves against our defenses." "You speak of things you do not understand," the emperor replied. And for the first time, Yuna heard something like fear in her father's voice. "I have seen the reports that our military commanders dare not share with the public, and I have watched recordings of human soldiers fighting against odds that would make any Valorian surrender. Yet they never stop, they never break, and they never give up even when victory is impossible." He took his daughter's hands in his own, and through the telepathic bond they shared as family, he showed her memories that made her blood run cold. She saw human soldiers charging into certain death to save their wounded companions, and she felt the raw determination that burned in their short-lived arts like nuclear fire. She saw human scientists working without sleep for weeks to solve problems that Valorian researchers had abandoned as impossible. And she witnessed human parents lifting impossible weights to save their children from danger. "They are not weak because they die young," the emperor said softly. "They are terrifying because they know they will die, and they choose to burn with all their fuel at once rather than fade slowly into darkness." Yuna pulled her hands away from her father, refusing to accept what he had shown her, because accepting it would mean accepting that everything she had been taught about human inferiority was wrong. "I will not do this," she said, her voice trembling now with something other than anger. "You cannot force me to marry some human who will be dead before I reach middle age." The emperor sighed deeply and turned to address the council. My daughter requires education before she can fulfill her duties, he announced. She will travel to Earth as a diplomatic envoy and spend 1 full Earth year learning about humanity. And when she returns, she will understand why this alliance must happen. Yuna's eyes went wide with horror at this pronouncement, and she stumbled backward as if her father had struck her. You would send me to that death world? She gasped. Earth is a planet of extreme gravity, violent weather, and predators that hunt for pleasure. And you would abandon your own daughter there? You will have a security detail and a human liaison to ensure your safety, the emperor said. Unmoved by her protests, consider this a gift, daughter. For I am giving you the chance to prove me wrong. So go to Earth, learn about humans. And if you return still convinced that they are unworthy of our people, I will consider releasing you from this obligation. Hope flickered briefly in Yuna's heart at these words, and she straightened her spine with renewed determination. Then I accept your challenge, father, she declared. I will go to this primitive planet and document every barbaric practice these humans engage in. And when I return with evidence of their inferiority, you will tear up this marriage contract yourself. The emperor smiled sadly at his daughter's confidence, for he had once shared her prejudice against the younger species until a human saved his life during the Void War 30 years ago. Your transport leaves tomorrow morning, he said. I suggest you pack lightly and open your mind to possibilities you have never considered. Yuna turned and walked out of the throne room with her head held high, already planning the report she would write to prove that humans were nothing more than violent primitives. Unworthy of Valorian attention, she did not see the look that passed between her father and Director Chun. A look of understanding between 2 old soldiers who had both seen too much war and wanted nothing more than peace for their children. And she did not feel the faint telepathic whisper her father sent after her. A message filled with love and hope that she would learn what he had learned so many years ago. Humans were not the primitive creatures the Valorian educational system described, and his daughter would discover this truth for herself. Even if the lesson was painful, the next morning, Princess Yuna boarded a diplomatic vessel bound for Earth, carrying 3 suitcases of fine clothing, a personal shield generator rated for combat zones, an absolute certainty that she would prove her father wrong within the first month. She was about to discover how wrong she truly was. The gravity hit Yuna like a physical blow the moment she stepped off the transport ship, and she stumbled forward before catching herself on a railing that seemed far too low for proper users, pulled at her body with a force nearly twice what she experienced on her homeworld. And every step felt like walking through thick water while carrying heavy stones on her shoulders. Princess Yuna, welcome to Earth, said a voice in carefully practiced Valorian. And she looked up to see a human male in a crisp military uniform standing at attention before her. He was tall for a human, with black hair cut short and dark eyes that studied her with an intelligence she had not expected. And the nameplate on his chest read, Captain Park Jinho, in both human script and Valorian symbols. You are my assigned handler? Yuna asked coldly, making no effort to hide her displeasure at being greeted by a single officer rather than a proper diplomatic welcome party. Liaison officer, Jinho corrected gently. I will be responsible for your safety, your schedule, and helping you understand our culture during your stay. And I hope we can work together productively. Yuna almost laughed at the absurdity of a human hoping to teach her anything, but she swallowed the bitter sound and simply nodded with minimal courtesy. Then take me to my quarters, she commanded. This gravity is unpleasant, and I require rest before beginning my observations. Jinho led her to a ground vehicle that moved along roads crowded with other vehicles, pedestrians, and chaos that made Yuna's head spin with sensory overload everywhere she looked. Humans rushed past each other in a blur of motion and noise, shouting greetings, arguing over trivial matters. laughing at jokes she could not understand, and displaying emotions with such raw intensity that she had to strengthen her mental shields just to block out the psychic noise. Why do they all move so fast? She asked despite herself, watching a young human sprint across the road just before the light changed. Humans have a saying, Jinho replied without taking his eyes off the road. Life is short, so we try to fit as much as possible into every day. Life is short because you waste it running around like frightened animals, Yuna muttered. But Jinho either did not hear her or chose not to respond to her. Quarters turned out to be a diplomatic suite in a tall building that overlooked a vast park. And Yuna had to admit privately that the view was not entirely unpleasant. Mountains rose in the distance beyond the city, and the sky displayed colors she had never seen before, with shades of orange and pink that painted the clouds as the local star descended toward the horizon. Sunset, Jinho said, noticing her attention. Many humans consider it one of the most beautiful times of day. My homeworld has 3 suns, Yuna replied dismissively. We have sunsets constantly, so this is nothing special to me. Jinho simply nodded and left her alone to rest, promising to return the next morning to begin her official tour of Earth that first night. Yuna lay awake for hours as her body struggled to adjust to the heavy gravity, the strange sounds of the city below, and the overwhelming psychic presence of millions of human minds pressing against her shields like waves against a shore. She had never felt so alone in her life, surrounded by aliens whose thoughts were too loud and too fast and too foreign for her to comprehend. The next morning began a routine that would continue for weeks, with Jinho arriving punctually to escort her to various locations that demonstrated human culture, history, and achievement. She visited museums filled with artifacts from human wars, and she documented the violence with grim satisfaction, knowing how humans had spent most of their history killing each other over resources, religion, and simple hatred. She observed human sporting events where competitors threw themselves into physical contests with aggressive determination, colliding with each other, falling down, bleeding, and then getting back up to continue fighting for victory. Barbaric, she wrote in her reports to her father. Humans celebrate violence and pain as entertainment, proving their primitive nature. She watched humans consume meat from animals they had killed, cooking the flesh over open flames and eating it with obvious pleasure, and she felt her stomach turn at the carnivorous display. But as the weeks passed, small observations began to trouble the perfect certainty she had brought from her homeworld. She noticed how Jinho worked from early morning until late at night, handling her demanding schedule while also managing dozens of other responsibilities. Yet he never complained and never showed impatience with her constant criticisms. She watched emergency responders rush toward a building fire while everyone else ran away, and she felt their determination through her shields, even though they knew they might die in the flames. She saw a human mother work 3 different jobs to pay for her child's education, sacrificing her own comfort so that her daughter might have a better future. Why does she do this? Yuna asked Jinho after observing the exhausted woman leaving her 3rd workplace. Her child will grow up and probably forget all these sacrifices. So, what is the purpose? Jinho looked at her with an expression she could not read, and his answer stayed with her long after he spoke. Because that is what love looks like, he said simply. Humans love knowing that we will lose everything eventually, so we give everything we have while we still can. Yuna told herself that this was foolish sentimentality from a short-lived species, but she found herself watching humans more closely after that conversation. She saw an elderly man visit his wife's grave every single day, bringing fresh flowers and talking to a stone marker as if she could still hear him. She watched young humans volunteer in hospitals, spending their precious free time helping strangers who could offer nothing in return. She observed Jinho himself giving half his lunch to a homeless veteran on the street, Sharing food with a stranger simply because the stranger was hungry, none of this matched what she had been taught about human selfishness and primitive behavior. And Yuna began to suspect that her education had been incomplete. But she pushed these doubts aside and continued writing her reports, focusing on every negative observation she could find, while ignoring the growing pile of evidence that suggested humans were far more complex than she wanted to admit. The truth would find her eventually, whether she was ready for it or not. 3 months into her stay on Earth, Captain Jinho made an unusual request that caught Yuna completely off guard. "My grandmother is hosting a harvest festival in my hometown," he said one morning over breakfast. "She has invited you to attend, and I believe it would be valuable for your cultural education." Yuna wanted to refuse immediately, but something in Jinho's voice made her hesitate. A softness that she had never heard before when he spoke about his work or his duties. "Your grandmother knows who I am?" she asked suspiciously. "She knows that I have publicly declared humans unworthy of Valorian attention?" "She knows," Jinho confirmed with a small smile. "And she said that anyone who has never tasted her rice cakes cannot make proper judgments about anything. So she insists that you come." Against her better judgment, Yuna agreed to the visit, telling herself that observing primitive human harvest rituals would provide excellent material for her reports. The journey to Jinho's hometown took several hours by ground vehicle, passing through landscapes that Yuna had to admit were breathtakingly beautiful. Mountains covered in autumn colors rose against a clear blue sky, and rivers wound through valleys where small villages clustered around ancient temples that had stood for centuries. "This is where my family has lived for 12 generations," Jinho said as they entered a small town surrounded by rice fields that glowed golden in the afternoon. His grandmother's house was modest by any standard, a traditional structure with curved roofs and wooden walls that showed their age. But the warmth that greeted Yuna when she stepped inside was unlike anything she had experienced. "So you are the princess who hates humans," announced a tiny elderly woman who barely reached Yuna's shoulder, and her wrinkled face broke into a smile that seemed to light up the entire room before Yuna could respond with appropriate dignity. The old woman grabbed her hands and pulled her toward the kitchen, chattering in a mixture of languages that her translator struggled to keep up with. "Look at you. So thin and pale from living in that fancy city apartment," Grandmother Park declared. "We will fix that with good food and fresh air, and by the time you leave, you will understand why humans are worth knowing." Yuna found herself seated at a low table surrounded by Jinho's extended family, with aunts and uncles and cousins who ranged from elderly to infant, and all of them treated her with kindness that she had not earned and did not deserve. The food came in endless waves, dishes she had never seen before, and Grandmother Park personally guided her through each one, explaining the history and meaning behind recipes that had been passed down for generations. "This one we make for new beginnings," the old woman said, placing a sweet rice cake in Yuna's hands. "And this one is for honoring those who came before us. And this one is simply because life should taste good sometimes." As the meal continued and the family laughed and argued and shared stories, Yuna made a decision that would change everything. She lowered her mental shields. The emotions that washed over her were nothing like the chaotic noise she experienced in the cities. And instead of overwhelming her, they wrapped around her like a warm blanket on a cold night. She felt love so deep and unconditional that it brought tears to her eyes. Love between parents and children and grandparents and cousins who might disagree about politics or careers, but would never stop caring for each other. She felt gratitude for simple things, for food grown from the earth, for roof over their heads, for another year of health and happiness. She felt sorrow too, hidden beneath the celebration. Grief for family members who had passed and would never share another harvest festival. But even the sorrow was beautiful in its own way. a testament to bonds that death itself could not erase. "You feel it now," Grandmother Park said quietly, somehow knowing that Yuna had opened herself to the experience. "Human emotions are not weakness, child. They are concentrated life, burning bright because we know our time is short." Yuna could not speak past the lump in her throat, so she simply nodded and accepted another rice cake from the old woman, who had welcomed a hostile alien princess into her home without hesitation. That evening, Jinho took her for a walk through the village as lanterns were lit along the streets and families gathered to watch traditional performances. "I owe you an apology," Yuna said suddenly, the words surprising her as much as they surprised Jinho. "I have treated you poorly since I arrived, and you have responded with nothing but patience and kindness." Jinho was quiet for a moment before he responded. "My grandfather fought in the last war against your people," he said. "He lost his leg and many friends, and he had every reason to hate Valorians for the rest of his life. But instead, he spent his final years teaching me that hatred only creates more hatred, and understanding is the only path to peace." "He sounds like a wise man," Yuna said softly. "He was," Jinho agreed. "And he would have liked you, I think, because he always said that the people who fight hardest against new ideas are often the ones who change the most when they finally open their minds." They walked in comfortable silence after that, and Yuna found herself enjoying the simple pleasure of being present in a moment without judging or analyzing or preparing reports. News of the raid came just before midnight, shattering the peaceful evening with urgent messages on Jinho's communication. The Vice colony 300 kilometers away had been attacked by pirates, and emergency responders needed all available help to rescue survivors from the burning settlement. Jinho immediately volunteered, despite being off-duty and having no obligation to respond. And Yuna watched him transform from gentle guide to determined soldier in the span of seconds. "Stay here where you are safe," he told her before rushing to join the rescue convoy. "I will return as soon as I can." But Yuna did not stay behind. She followed the convoy using her personal transport, arriving at the devastated colony just as rescue operations began. And she watched from the shadows as Jinho plunged into burning buildings again and again. He carried wounded civilians on his back through flames that scorched his uniform and smoke that must have burned his lungs with every breath. He shielded children with his own body when secondary explosions rocked the settlement, and he refused to leave even when his commanding officer ordered him to rest by dawn. 47 survivors had been pulled from the wreckage, and Jinho collapsed from exhaustion only after being physically dragged away from the ruins by his fellow soldiers. That night, Yuna sent no report to her father. She had nothing left to criticize. And for the first time since arriving on Earth, she wondered if she had been wrong about everything. The encrypted message arrived 6 months into Yuna's stay on Earth, transmitted through channels that only Valorian nobility could access. And its contents made her blood turn to ice. "Princess Yuna," the message began, "we represent the true Valorian movement. Patriots who refuse to see our glorious civilization polluted by alliance with human animals. And we offer you freedom from your unwanted marriage if you will support our cause." The message detailed a conspiracy that had been growing in the shadows of the imperial court for years. A faction of military commanders and noble families who believed that Valorians should rule the galaxy rather than share it with lesser species. They had planted false evidence in human military databases, documents that appeared to show the system's alliance planning a surprise invasion of Valorian territory. And they planned to reveal this evidence at the next Galactic Council meeting. War would follow within days. The conspirators promised a war that would end with human extinction and Valorian supremacy. And Yuna would be free to marry a proper Valorian noble instead of some human diplomat. All she had to do was confirm the evidence when asked. use her position as diplomatic envoy to lend credibility to the lie, and return home as a hero who had exposed human treachery. Yuna read the message 3 times before she fully understood what was being asked of her 6 months ago. She would have accepted without hesitation, grateful for any escape from marriage to a species she considered beneath her. But 6 months ago, she had not met Grandmother Park and tasted rice cakes made with love passed down through generations she had not watched. Emergency workers run toward fire and death to save strangers who could never repay the sacrifice. She had not seen Jinho work himself to exhaustion because he believed that every life was worth saving. Regardless of species or status or anything else, she had not felt the concentrated intensity of human emotion. That burning brightness that came from knowing life was short and choosing to love. Anyway, Yuna closed the message and sat in darkness for hours, wrestling with a choice that would determine the fate of billions. If she supported the conspiracy, she would get everything she had wanted when she first arrived on Earth: her freedom from unwanted marriage, her return to respected status among her people, her comfortable certainty that humans were inferior creatures unworthy of Valorian attention. All it would cost was the lives of every human she had met, every child she had seen playing in parks, every family sharing meals together, every soldier rushing toward danger to protect others. Grandmother Park would die in the war, her small house destroyed by orbital bombardment. Jinho would die fighting to protect his people, his determination and courage counting for nothing against Valorian technological superiority. The colony survivors he had rescued would die, their second chance at life erased by weapons fired from ships crewed by Yuna's own people. No, Yuna whispered to the empty room, and she made her choice. The next morning, she contacted Jinho and told him everything, showing him the encrypted message and explaining the full scope of the conspiracy that threatened both their peoples. To his credit, Jinho did not waste time with anger or accusations. "We need evidence," he said immediately, his soldier's mind already working on the problem. "The conspirators will deny everything without proof, and your word alone will not be enough to stop a war that many on both sides secretly want." Together, they developed a plan that would require Yuna to risk everything she had left. She would pretend to support the conspiracy, responding to the message with enthusiasm and requesting a meeting with the faction leaders to coordinate their story. When the leaders arrived, Yuna would use her telepathic abilities to extract the truth directly from their minds. Recording their memories as evidence that no one could dispute it was dangerous beyond measure. For if the conspirators discovered her deception, they would kill her without hesitation and proceed with their plan. "You do not have to do this," Jinho told her the night before the meeting. "You could simply expose the conspiracy publicly and let others handle the investigation, which would be safer for you." "Safer is not enough," Yuna replied, and she realized that she was speaking words she had learned from humans. "If the evidence is not perfect, the conspirators will escape justice and try again. And next time we might not discover their plan in time." Jinho looked at her with an expression she had never seen before, something like respect mixed with something else she could not name. "You have changed," he said quietly. "The princess who arrived 6 months ago would never risk her life for humans she barely knows. That princess was a fool," Yuna admitted. She thought that living 800 years made Valorian superior, but she never understood that the length of a life matters far less than how it is lived. The meeting took place in an abandoned warehouse far from any human settlement, and Yuna faced 3 high-ranking Valorian officers who had traveled secretly to Earth to coordinate the final stages of their plan. They welcomed her as a fellow patriot, praising her wisdom and recognizing human inferiority, and they outlined the evidence they had planted in such gleeful detail that Yuna felt physically sick when the moment came. She struck with all her telepathic power, ripping through their mental defenses and extracting every memory related to the conspiracy. She saw their secret meetings, their forged documents, their fantasies of human genocide. And she recorded everything with technology that transmitted directly to both the Valorian Imperial Court and the human systems alliance, but the conspirators were not helpless. And one of them managed to trigger a distress signal before Yuna could finish her work within minutes. Loyalist troops surrounded the warehouse. Soldiers who believed in Valorian supremacy and would gladly execute a race traitor. Princess who had betrayed her own kind. You have doomed yourself. The lead conspirator snarled as his people burst through the doors. When you are dead, we will blame the humans and proceed with our plan. And no one will ever know the truth. Yuna prepared to fight and die, for she had no regrets about her choice. But fate, it seemed, had other plans outside the warehouse. Weapons fire erupted, and through the windows, Yuna could see shapes moving through the darkness. Attackers who fought with desperate determination against the Loyalist troops' help had arrived. Though Yuna had no idea how or from where, all she could do was survive long enough to find out. Captain Park Jin-ho had never been the type to follow orders that conflicted with his conscience. And when Yuna's transmission revealed her location to everyone with access to the right channels, he knew exactly what he had to do. He was supposed to wait for official authorization, supposed to coordinate with command, supposed to let the politicians and diplomats decide whether rescuing one Valorian princess was worth the risk of military escalation instead. He gathered every soldier, human and Valorian, who believed that peace was worth fighting for, and he led an unauthorized assault on the warehouse where the woman he had come to respect was about to die. Contact in 30 seconds. His second-in-command reported through the communication link. Sensors show approximately 40 hostile soldiers surrounding the building, with more inbound from the north. Then we better move fast, Jin-ho replied, and he gave the signal to attack. The battle was brutal and chaotic. Exactly the kind of fight that military academies taught officers to avoid. But Jin-ho had learned long ago that some things could not be won through careful planning and strategic positioning. Sometimes victory required charging straight into danger and trusting that courage would be enough. His team fought through the Loyalist perimeter like a blade through flesh, and Jin-ho himself led the charge through the warehouse doors, his weapon blazing and his heart pounding with fear that he might be too late. He found Yuna standing in the center of the room, wounded but alive, facing down 3 conspirators who looked at her with murder in their eyes. You came, she said. And despite everything happening around them, she smiled. I told you I would return as soon as I could, Jin-ho replied, positioning himself between the princess and her enemies. Now let us finish this together. The fight that followed lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. A desperate struggle between those who wanted war and those who refused to let hatred win. When the last conspirator fell and the Loyalist troops surrendered to overwhelming numbers, Jin-ho finally allowed himself to breathe. Yuna collapsed against him, exhausted from battle and telepathic strain, and he caught her without thinking, holding her steady as medics rushed to treat her wounds. The evidence was transmitted successfully, she whispered. Both governments have everything they need to expose the conspiracy and arrest everyone involved. Then it is over, Jin-ho said, relief flooding through him like warm water. Not quite, Yuna replied, and she looked up at him with violet eyes that held no trace of the contempt she had shown when they first met. I still have one more thing to do. 2 weeks later, Princess Yuna stood before the Galactic Council for the second time. But everything had changed since her last appearance in this chamber. The conspirators had been arrested, their plot exposed in detail that left no room for doubt or denial. And both Valorian and human governments had publicly condemned the attempt to start a war. Through deception, Emperor Taizong watched his daughter from his throne. And though his face remained formal and composed, his eyes shone with pride that he did not bother to hide. "Honored representatives," Yuna began, her voice steady and clear, "I stand before you today to correct a terrible wrong. Not the conspiracy that nearly destroyed our peace, but the prejudice that made such a conspiracy possible." She paused, gathering her thoughts, and when she continued, her words reached every corner of the vast chamber. "When I last addressed this council, I declared that humans were unworthy of Valorian attention, that their short lives made them primitive, and that any alliance with them would diminish our greatness. I was wrong." The chamber fell absolutely silent, every representative leaning forward to hear what the changed princess would say next. "I have lived among humans for 1 Earth year," Yuna continued. "I have eaten their food and walked their streets and felt their emotions with my own mind. And I have learned that the length of a life matters far less than the love put into living it." She told them about Grandmother Park, who welcomed a hostile stranger into her home and taught her that food made with love could bridge any gap between peoples. She told them about the emergency workers who ran toward fire, the parents who sacrificed everything for their children, the soldiers who fought to save lives rather than take them. She told them about Jinho, who never once returned her contempt with cruelty, who taught her through example that patience and kindness could accomplish what force and anger never would. "Humans do not love despite their short lives," Yuna declared, her voice rising with conviction. "They love fiercely because of them, knowing that every moment is precious and every connection is a gift that must be treasured while it lasts. They are not flickering candles that burn out and are forgotten. They are stars, burning with all their fuel at once, lighting the way for others who will follow." The chamber erupted in applause, representatives from dozens of species rising to acknowledge the princess who had found the courage to change her mind and admit her mistakes before the entire galaxy. When the noise finally settled, Emperor Taizong asked the question that everyone wanted to hear: "And what of the marriage alliance? Daughter, do you still refuse to wed a human?" Yuna turned to look at Jinho, who stood in the human delegation with his grandmother beside him, the old woman who had traveled across space just to see this moment. "I asked that the political arrangement be dissolved," Yuna announced, and gasps echoed through the chamber. "Not because I refuse to wed a human, but because when I marry, it will be for love, not duty." She descended from the speaker's platform and walked across the floor to where Jinho waited, taking his hand in hers before the watching galaxy. "I do not know what our future holds," she said to him quietly, though every microphone in the room broadcast her words to the entire council. "Your life is short by my standards, and loving you means accepting that I will lose you far too soon. But humans have taught me that love is not diminished by loss. It is made more precious." Jinho squeezed her hand, and his smile was brighter than any sunset she had ever seen. "Then let us make the most of whatever time we have," he replied. Together, Emperor Taizong rose from his throne and formally dissolved the arranged marriage, blessing his daughter's choice with words that would echo through history. Grandmother Park simply nodded with satisfaction, as if she had known all along how this story would end, and Princess Yuna, who had once declared that she would never wed a human, walked out of the Galactic Council chamber hand in hand with Captain Park Jinho, two people from different worlds who had chosen to build a future together. The galaxy watched them go, and for the first time in generations, both humans and Valorians dared to hope that peace might actually last, not because of treaties or alliances or political arrangements, but because two people had proven that understanding could grow where hatred once lived, and that love, genuine love, chosen freely and given completely, was the most powerful force in any universe. The dawn of a new era had begun, one relationship at a time.